Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webcast on the Transition Assessment and Goal Generator. My name is Jim Martin, and I will be hosting this webcast, actually delivering the webcast. And I'm actually an Illinois boy. I grew up in East Central Illinois. Worked professionally for a few years in Illinois before I decided I needed to learn more. And I went and got my doctoral degree in special education with a focus on what we now call secondary transition education. And now, where did I get my doctoral degree from? Did I get it from here? Did I get it from this program that has a red maple leaf on it? Did I get it from the school that has a not very happy horse with a cowboy trying to ride it? Or did I get it from the school that had a black eye or a block eye? Not a black eye, but a block eye. Now, which one did I get my doctoral degree from? Well, I am a proud graduate of the University of Illinois. Welcome to my home study. We're here today now. Now I'm a retired professor from the University of Oklahoma. I received my doctoral degree back in the 1980s from the University of Illinois in what is now the secondary transition education emphasis area. And since then, I've been working around the country at different universities. Most notably, I was a professor at University of Colorado Springs for, 16 years, where I was a co-founder and director of the Center for Self-Determination at University of Colorado. I then got a great opportunity to come to the University of Oklahoma to begin the Zero Center. And so I held the Zero Center Endowed Chair. I directed the Zero Center. I was a professor in the educational psychology department where I taught in the special education program. And I've been involved in transition education issues since basically since I got involved in the field. And so it's a great pleasure to be here with you. And I look forward to sharing today in this webcast specifically what my colleagues and I are very proud of. And so without further ado, let me press some buttons here and we'll get into the PowerPoint and today's presentation on the Transition Assessment and Goal Generator. Here we go. Looks like everything is working. I'm sharing my screen. We need to thank, first of all, the Illinois Center for Transition and Work. This center is sponsoring this webcast, and we'll be doing some amazing things in transition education now and into the future. My name, as I said earlier, is Jim Martin. And the presentation is Transition Assessment and Goal Generator, otherwise known as TAGG, and we'll be using TAGG throughout this presentation. So there's 5 things we're going to talk about today. The first is the purpose of special education, what that is. We'll look briefly at some transition assessment fundamentals, and then we'll look at an assessment that is based on identifiable generalizable success behaviors, behaviors that research found are either highly associated with or predictive of post-school further education and employment success. And then we'll go specifically into the Transition Assessment and Goal Generator. As you'll learn along the way, the Transition Assessment and Goal Generator, or the TAGG, it's a very unique assessment. Some consider it a self-determination assessment, But it's more than that. It's like a self-determination assessment on steroids, because it does examine self-determination, and as we'll learn, it correlates quite highly to the AIR self-determination assessment, but also looks at other skills that research found are critical for post-secondary education success. So without further ado, let's hop into the purpose of special education. What is special education all about? Well, it's defined in the first paragraph of IDEA 2004 when it states that special education, the purpose of it is a free, appropriate public education that emphasizes special ed and related services designed to meet students' unique needs. And this is the important part for us here today, and prepares our students for further education, employment, and independent living. These three areas, not surprisingly, match exactly the post-secondary goals that we need to address in the IEPs of students who are of transition age. Transition age, by the way, is a really interesting undertaking. The federal law says it has to at least begin by age 16, which many of us believe is too late. And not surprisingly, because many of us believe it's too late, over half the states now begin formal transition planning before the age of 16. Most begin at 14, some even lower than that. But 14, 15, first year of high school, over half the states now begin before the federal age of 16, because we know it's so critical to get started on this for students' success in school as well as success out of school. So let's look briefly at transition assessment fundamentals. CEC's Division on Career Development and Transition, which is the major organization in the country devoted to transition education, believes that transition assessment is an ongoing process of gathering data on students' needs, their interests, their skills, as they relate to demands of their current living, learning, and vocational environments. And these results, the assessment results, serve as the common thread in the transition process and are the basis for developing IEP goals and services. So to kind of summarize then, the focus is upon the future role of worker and citizen. Student choice is a major theme. Transition assessment is ongoing future focus and person-centered. As much as possible, we need to teach and provide students the opportunity to be engaged in the transition process, including active engagement as much as possible at their own IEP transition planning meetings. And the end result of a transition assessment process is a match between strengths, between needs and interests, and the demands of the culture and future environments. Make sense? This is how the Division on Career Development and Transition really thinks what transition assessment ought to be. And Sitlington and colleagues wrote this in the late 90s. Prince et al., as a follow-up to what has happened in transition education practices. You know, transition ed has been around long enough now that due process cases many of them have gone from the schools and have gone into federal district courts to be processed. Someone, either the school or the family, appealed the result and wanted a higher court to re-examine it. And so Prince and her colleagues examined district court findings about transition, in particular transition assessment. And this is what they found, is that the court believes, just like the law says, that we need to use multiple assessments in a student's transition assessment battery. And these have to be done so they cover different transition domains. They need to go across transition domains, not just work, for instance, but needs to look at other transition domains as well. And the courts have found, and this is above and beyond what IDEA 2004 states, the courts have found to have a good assessment process, at least one of the transition assessments need to have ample validity evidence supporting its use as a tool for adolescents with disabilities. The other assessments in a transition assessment battery can be informal assessments, or those that have little to no supporting validity evidence, but you as an educator or as a school or district believe that these assessments, these informal assessments, also provide a lot of useful information for transition planning. And the courts have said that we need to maximize as much as possible student participation in the transition planning process. I take that to mean participation in transition assessment, as well as the planning components and follow up after the IEP meeting, because that's the entire transition process. Generalizable behaviors are a really interesting concept to consider because we know not all skills that we teach are of equally importance. Some skills students might just use for this one particular issue or instance or need. But there are a set of skills that we know of that when students learn and practice these skills, they will generalize to almost any type of post-secondary goal. And we know that very few students actually end up doing, say working, very few students actually end up working in the job or career area that their high school post-secondary goals thought they would do. So we don't have to get too wrapped up into what that particular post-secondary goal would be that students select, but instead we need to focus more on the underlying support skills that will help students be successful across any post-secondary goal. Got that? It's an important concept. And so we have to focus on self-determination and other skills and experiences that we know predict post-secondary education, employment, and/or independent living outcomes. And these behaviors are what the TAGG encompasses. So we felt a great need to develop a new transition assessment and one that had ample validity evidence. So we wanted to focus on these generalizable skills that were learned will really facilitate post-school success. And so we know that post-secondary goals set the direction of where students think they would like to go in the future. The annual transition goals are the skills that students are going to learn now to help them reach that post-secondary goal. Think of it as a cruise ship or a freight boat going somewhere. The post-secondary goals set the direction of the boat. And the annual transition goals are the engine that really powers the boat. And these critical generalizable skills, we can set those up as our annual transition goals are the skills that we want students to learn and practice to help achieve whatever their secondary goals end up being. So we wanted to develop a transition assessment tool that is based upon self-determination skills, but also include other non-academic skills that are predictive or highly associated with improved post-school outcomes. My goodness, there are no lack of academic assessments that our students have while they're going through school. No lack of those. So we didn't want to make this another focus on another academic assessment because those are important. But what we realize is that these non-academic skills are also critical for post-secondary success, as well as for success in school. And so we wanted to develop a transition assessment that would do that. We wanted it to have multiple versions, a version for the parent to fill out, a version for the educator, and a version for the student. And we wanted it to produce IEP-ready results. I'm so tired of these assessments that are elaborate, they're complicated, they cost a lot of money. And when you're all done, all you get is a single score. You don't get lists of strengths, you don't get lists of needs. They don't give you a pre-prepared write-up of a summary that you can take and drop into your IEP. It doesn't produce possible meaningful goals matched to the greatest needs. So we wanted to do one that will do all of that, that will produce IEP-ready results and have ample validity evidence. So these questions are the ones that we believe educators need to look at as they are choosing an assessment for their transition assessment battery. Number one, what is the purpose of this assessment? Number two, who was it designed for? Was it designed actually for adolescents of transition age? And where did the assessment items come from? Did somebody just sit in their home study, kind of like where I'm at now, and just type up their assessment? Or did they do something more elaborate that adds more meaning to it? And does ample validity evidence exist for internal reliability, test-retest reliability, or no or little bias by gender, by where someone in school, whether they're always in general ed or general ed and special ed, not biased by GPA or grade or disability category, or by socioeconomic status? Because assessments all have many of them have bias built in, and we need to know what that bias is. The problem is so many assessments don't give us that information. And we wanted to have one more than anything where that had results that predicted post-school outcomes. We used this book called Standards for Educational and Psychological Assessment. It's put out by a coalition of major professional groups in the field, and it details the standards of what a test ought to be like for it to be a meaningful assessment tool. And so we followed the standards in developing the TAGG. The initial process was this. We did a literature review of all the research that had been done that identified skills and experiences associated with or predictive of some kind of post-secondary success. And it had to be a particular skill we could identify, not just a big, broad cluster of skill, but what sub-skill was this success linked to? Because those are the skills that we can teach. We developed a pilot tool, collected social validity on it, got feedback from professionals on it. And we found that teachers wanted a tool like this. They wanted IEP-ready results, and they wanted multiple versions of a transition assessment. We had a great idea, but to develop an assessment that is good, that has ample validity evidence to support its use, it takes a lot of money to develop one of these. And so we went to the Institute for Education Sciences, which is a funding section of the US Department of Education. And we built a strong research team with the assessment background, a background in testing, statistics, and special education. So we all of us got together to do this. We submitted a proposal. It got positive feedback, didn't get funded. So we resubmitted it and it got funded. And that began a process of then creating the TAGG. It was a really intense yet enjoyable process. So we ended up calling this the TAGG, Transition Assessment and Goal Generator. And we like to think of it as a self-determination assessment on steroid. In reality, it's more than a self-determination assessment. It can be considered one, but it's more than just self-determination. And you can download it at the OU Zero website. Just Google that or go to that particular web address to download the TAGG. So the purpose of the TAGG is to assess non-academic skills associated with and predictive of positive post-school employment and further education outcomes. To provide the IEP team with a list of student strengths, needs, not just needs, but the greatest needs and relative needs, a written summary that could be copied and pasted and dropped right into the IEP section, and annual transition goals matched to the greatest needs to facilitate writing a compliant IEP, which I call a indicator 13, because this is the part of the regulations, the special ed regulations that address writing students' transition IEP. We wanted the TAGG to assess secondary age students with disabilities who plan to be competitively employed and or enrolled in post-secondary education. So it's not for a particular disability group, just for secondary age students who want to be competitively employed or to get involved in post-secondary education. And each TAGG set includes a student version, a family version, and a professional version. So where did the items come from? Well, they came from research studies that identified the behaviors of students, of former students engaged in employment and or further education. And we initially used the research studies to develop 10 construct definitions. And then from those definitions, we developed items specific to what the research said was the behavior that was predictive of or associated with better post-school outcomes. We created 15 in an iterative process. We created 15 TAGG versions before we did field testing. And then we undertook a really elaborate nationwide multiple year field testing process. So the TAGG constructs, as it finally turned out, are strengths and limitations, disability awareness, student involvement in the IEP process, persistence, goal setting and attainment, interacting with others, employment, and a supporting community. We'll talk more about specific validity evidence later, but now let's go into look at the TAGG. This is the screenshot of the TAGG website that's available at the OU Zero Center. Gives a brief description of the TAGG. The button at the bottom you can click to learn more about the TAGG. There's videos to watch about the TAGG, some frequently asked questions about the TAGG, a description about the TAGG, another link of where you can find the curriculum materials that can support teaching the identified needs from the TAGG assessment. If you want to create a TAGG account, click on that button and to log in. Once you have an account, you can log in and then access your TAGG. We looked at the reading level across the different versions of the TAGG and found that the professional level is written at a 10.4 grade level, the family at a 5.7, and the student is at a 4.8 grade level. We wanted the student level to be lower than that, but there are several words in the TAGG that we just couldn't make shorter. Words like rehabilitation counselor, or other multiple syllable words that helps determine the reading level that students just simply need to know as much as they can about those particular phrases or words. But for students who can't fully read it, students can click on a button and have it read to them as a way to back up. So we have it available in written and audio English. We have a video with American Sign Language and corresponding audio English, written and audio Spanish, written traditional Chinese, and written simplified Chinese. So those are the different languages that users can access to get into the student or parent version. The professional one is all in English. So it's an online assessment. So the user will go in to the website, respond to the items, complete the assessment. And when done, it will create a web-generated results profile. It will do a graphic result by construct, a written summary, a listing of relative and greatest strengths, relative and greatest needs. It will come up with annual transition goal recommendations based on the greatest needs identified by the parent, the educator, the student, user, and the results can all be copied and pasted directly into an IEP. Kind of snazzy. It had to be a web-generated profile because the algorithms that compile the scores uses something called item response theory. It's an advanced psychometric tool to weigh the relative merit of a particular response. And then from that, we can then come up. It's a norm referenced assessment as well. It's norm based upon the nationwide field testing we did and the results of students across disability levels. So let's look at the TAGG. This is what an assessment for Tyrus Thompson. And up at the top is general instructions. And this is the professional version. And we could play the audio or play ASL video, whichever one you wanted to click. Strength and limitations is a description of that construct that appears on the professional version. And then down below, in this case, the professional, the teacher, the educator, would then click the score they want. Like the student told someone what he or she does well. How well does the student do that? It's a measure of your perception of the quality of that response. Number two, it's under the strength and limitation section. The student told someone what he or she has trouble doing. 1 to 5. Another category, which is an interesting one, is disability awareness. How well do students really understand their disability? Not the psychological mumbo jumbo that the disability categories are written in, but how does the student understand the practical impacts of their disability? What are their strengths? What are their needs? What are their support options that is associated with disability? So number 5, the student uses the least stigmatizing disability label that results in getting the most support they need. 1 to 5. The student expressed the type of support or accommodation needed for his or her disability. What's interesting, question number 6, colleague of mine who worked at the Disability Support Office here at the University of Oklahoma told me one of the questions she almost always asked incoming students, OU students who were signing up for disability services was tell me what supports work best for you, or what accommodations do you need for your particular disability. She would always ask students to define what their disability is. So disability awareness comes in it's a handy thing to have. Goal setting and attainment is another construct. Number 17, the student set goals that match his or her strengths and interests while taking into consideration what the family or community wants him to do. The student creates short-term goals to attain long-term goals. Here's an example of the student tag in English. I knew the assignments I would have trouble with as soon as the teacher gave them to me. So the student version doesn't have the construct identified. It just has a list of questions, and that's it. Take students, and if they have trouble reading it, they can play audio. A lot of students like to play the ASL video, which has the ASL sign language plus audio, English audio with it as well. And we have a Spanish version, the student tag Spanish version. Not going to attempt to read that. And then we have web-generated results. It takes just a few seconds once you're done. You finish, the results are generated automatically, and it will give us relative and greatest strengths, needs, a written summary, graphic results by construct, by user, and combined results across constructs and annual transition goals. And if you want, you can reference them to Common Core state standards if you want to. Then you copy them and paste them directly into students' computerized IEPs. So here's what it looks like. Here's the combined results profile. So it's done on a bar chart, and like here's for the student strength and limitation. The top in red is what the student thinks, followed by blue what the parent thinks, and gray would be what the professional thinks. And we can see where their scores are, and this is the norm reference part of it. The professional puts the student at the average for students with disabilities. The parent is just at the line between below average or average. And then the student also places him or herself in the average category. For disability awareness, you can see the difference. The student ranks above average, the parent almost there, but put the student at average, almost at above average. And the professional put the student clearly in the average category. So we have these results. Not much we can do from it as a teacher, but it tells us the broad areas and really easy to display to parents and other IEP team members about where the student is at in a criterion sort of way, as well as with the norm reference, average, below average, above average. Then there's a summary statement. You can copy and paste all of this or whatever you want. Once you paste it in, you can tweak the wording if you'd rather have different wording or if you wanted to leave a sentence out, but a summary statement for the IEP. And then based on the annual transition goals of particular users, we will have sample IEP goals that can be copied and pasted into the IEP, and then you add to it to comply with whatever unique criteria you have for making goals. Here's one for goal setting and attainment based on the student's response. After the student completes one transition goal, he or she will report progress to the IEP team and offer suggestions for the next transition goal. Employment, goal setting, or strengths are just sample goals. And then you and the IEP team will decide which annual transition goals do we want to select to prioritize for next year. And then if you want to reference them to Common Core standards, you just click a button as you are signing up the student in the registration part of the assessment. And you can see what each of the goals are matched to. And if your state isn't a Common Core state, and I know several states aren't, Oklahoma is one of those who are not a common, and Oklahoma is not a Common Core state. So educators here just click that button off so it doesn't ever show up. And now there's additional validity. It's not just the basic that I told you about already, but there's more about the TAGG. There was 3 years of national data, over 2,500 participants from 42 states, 162 schools. You can see how many students, almost 1,300 students, Almost a little over 170 professionals completed the TAGG, on average 7 to 8 of their students, and almost 850 family members completed the TAGG on their child. And we did 3 rounds of national data collection, a round every year for 3 years to come up with this data. And because we have so much data, we could actually use item response theory in developing the scoring algorithms. We found excellent factor structure with the TAGG. The first year with the initial version of the TAGG, you can see the number of students that first year. We did a various factor analyses. And what factor analysis, it's really a cool statistical procedure, because it will look at all the items and it will cluster them where they think they logically fall. Remember, we had 10 initial constructs, and the factor analysis took it to 8. It combined one of them, dropped one of them, and the number of items in the initial version was 75. In the version after this was 34, because it told us what items worked and what items didn't work, and we threw away those items that didn't work. And then we did 2 years replication study to confirm the initial factor structure, which the factor analyses did. Generally, a score between 0.7 and 0.8 is considered good for internal reliability. And each TAGG version, the parent, the student, the professional version, has great overall internal consistency, ranging from 0.89 to 0.95. So within the good, above the good category. What do you think? So TAGG internal reliability measures are decent. That's the phrase I would use to describe these findings. Very decent internal reliability scores. We also looked at test-retest reliability, the ability to take a test today and then a number of weeks later take it again, and not enough time for students to learn more skills, but enough time to see if the same user on the same student would get close to the same scores. And so we waited 14 weeks after the first TAGG was given. And typically the test-retest reliability studies you see with most assessments, maybe 4 weeks. And we found a large correlation between the first and second administration, especially for the professional, a 0.80 correlation, all significant, 0.7 for family and 0.7 for student. And to me, this is where it gets really interesting, is looking at some of the supplemental validity evidence. We wanted to know if differences existed by gender. Well, we found there were no overall differences on the TAGG professional or the TAGG student. We did find some very small differences with the TAGG family. Families with graduate degrees, I know it's not gender now, but families with graduate degrees rated their students lower than those families with less education. And families rated males higher in the employment category than females. So overall, there's no differences by gender to speak of, some minor differences with the family version. We looked at socioeconomic status, and is it biased by a student's socioeconomic status background? Almost every test there is, especially those big achievement tests we do in schools every year, those are highly correlated to socioeconomic status. And we use free reduced lunch as our measure for SES. And there was no significant differences on the TAGG professional or the TAGG student, just a small difference on the TAGG family. Here is where the difference to family education comes to play. On the TAGG family, there were some differences. Those family members who had the highest level of education, compared to those at the lowest level had had some differences. Which way do you think it went? Did they rate students higher or lower? Well, what we found is students whose parents had higher education levels rated their children lower than students whose parents did not have as high as an education level. Graduate school, professional degrees versus high school education or no high school education. Disability categories, there were some, but they were small. On most constructs, students with other health impairment and learning disabilities were higher than autism, emotional disability, and intellectual disability. And like here's an example. Students with an emotional disability or autism scored lower on interacting with others. And this was on the professional and parent scored these students lower than the students themselves did. Huh. Interesting. How close are the student, professional, and family TAGG scores? What we found was medium correlation across the three. And for this type of an assessment, our psychometrician experts said it's excellent for this type of an assessment. We looked at measurement invariance and the structure held across all disability categories and found that the 3 TAGG versions are appropriate for students regardless of the time in general education classes, the number of transition education classes they completed, their high school grade level, or their disability category. And we looked at how close do the TAGG and the error self-determination assessment results align. And what we found, there's a medium correlation. This implies the TAGG addresses some self-determination skills, but it also assesses other. And this is just exact results we would want if we were to create results. But the correlation study ended up showing a medium correlation, meaning the TAGG assesses self-determination, but it assesses other things too. This is the one I'm proud of because Jennifer Burns, her dissertation study examined the predictive validity of the TAGG. She followed up about 300 former high school students who were involved in the national TAGG study. And what we found was that it predicted post-school outcomes for post-secondary education and employment. So students with higher TAGG scores had better post-secondary education outcomes and had better post-secondary employment outcomes. Here's what predicted post-secondary education: interacting with others, student involvement in the IEP, support community, goal setting, and attainment. So for instance, the more students were actively involved in their IEP, that contributed for better post-secondary education results. And also for employment, found that student involvement in the IEP, interacting with others, support community, and an employment history, having had a job before, where these constructs were associated with predicting post-secondary employment. So look at what's common across these: student involvement in the IEP, student involvement in the IEP, interacting with others, interacting with others. Post-secondary education found support community and goal setting and attainment importance. Employment found support community, but also here that history of a prior job came important as well. So as I mentioned earlier, we use item response theory to score the results and produce results. And item response theory enable us to score the items differentially by their validity for assessing that particular construct of difference of interest. That means not every item isn't worth the same point value, so to speak. One might be worth 10, the other could be worth 3. Doesn't work that way, but as to give some examples of how it could work. So the overall score is a weighted combination of items. It's not an average of all the construct scores, but it takes each item and weighs it with item response theory to give us an overall TAGG score. So what do you think? Does ample validity evidence exist? I hope you feel like we do, that it certainly does. And what we found after developing of this and watching people around the country use it, is that the TAGG is useful for many students, but it left out those students who are in need of more significant support. It became obvious a new assessment needs to be developed specifically for that group of students. Students where the TAGG is not appropriate for. So we wrote another IES grant and we obtained the grant, and I retired from OU, but the developing of this is still ongoing. And so it's now called the TAGG-A, Transition Assessment and Goal Generator Alternate. It's under construction. It's getting close to being finished, so stay tuned at the Xero Center website. And I hope that when it's done, the TAGG-A will be made available at the Xero Center website. So you can see the initial constructs of the TAGG-A: academic skills, agency assistance, employment savvy, family home expectations, support personal experiences, school experiences, self-determination, self-care, social savvy, technology. After the factor analyses process through the field testing, I'm sure this is going to change around some. The number of items will decrease. But in summary, what we now know is that quality transition education begins with meaningful transition assessment. One thing I need to add, which I didn't say earlier, everything at the Xero Center website is free to use, free to download if you are a special educator or student or a family member. The only thing that is charged is for the TAGG, because it's so intensive with constant need for programming and to keeping it up on the website. It's not an easy website to maintain. And so there's a minimal charge of $3 per set. So for $3, you get the student, the professional, and the family version that you can use one time. So you use it this year, next year, you pay another $3 to get another set. So thank you all for being here. And I hope you enjoyed this particular presentation about the TAGG. And from my study here in Norman, Oklahoma, have a good day. Bye-bye.